Anyone can lock a garage, but I locked it, vanished to a mountain resort and live-streamed chaos while sipping poolside mimosas. My smart tech guy instincts kicked in when Margaret parked her beat-up Honda in my garage at 7 a.m. and claimed she was the neighborhood authority. I locked her in using my phone app and disappeared for a few days. What I watched through my phone screen was better than any reality TV show. 6 police calls, 1 homeless camp setup, multiple break-in attempts, and the complete meltdown of a grown woman who thought she could steal my garage. Drop a comment below, what city are you watching from? I'm curious how many of you have dealt with fake HOA people trying to steal your stuff. But to understand why I chose luxury vacation revenge over direct confrontation, let me start from the beginning. My name is Ethan Mitchell, and I'm a 29-year-old software engineer who works remotely from my house in Pine Valley Heights, Colorado. I bought this place 8 months ago specifically because it came with a 2-car garage and smart home features that I could control from my phone. The garage was my pride and joy: automatic door, security cameras, electronic locks, the whole tech setup. I never imagined it would become the battleground for the most satisfying revenge story of my life. It was a Tuesday morning in March, and I was getting ready for work when I pressed the garage door button and saw something that made my coffee cup freeze halfway to my lips. There, parked right in the middle of my garage, was a silver Honda Pilot from around 2019. The car was covered in scratches, had duct tape holding the rear bumper together, and definitely didn't belong to me. I pulled up my security camera app and scrolled back through the footage. There it was. 11:47 p.m. the night before, the garage door opens, and this Honda backs right into my space. A woman with bleached blonde hair steps out, looks directly at my security camera, and actually waves like she's checking into a hotel. I'm standing there thinking, seriously? She waved at my security camera like this was some kind of Airbnb situation. I grabbed my keys and walked outside to investigate, already running late for a morning video call with clients. That's when I met Margaret Rowley, and my life got infinitely more interesting. She appeared from the house across the street, wearing a pink blazer that was obviously fake designer, and carrying a clutch bag that screamed outlet mall clearance section. Her blonde highlights looked like they came from a box, and she had that aggressive smile that customer service managers use when they're about to deny your refund request. "Oh, hi there," she said, walking toward me with purpose. "You must be Ethan Mitchell. I'm Margaret Rowley, neighborhood rule manager for this area. My car needed emergency repairs, so I had to use temporary parking according to community guidelines." I looked at my phone app showing my garage security system and then back at her. Community guidelines? And rule manager since when? She pulled out a folder of official-looking papers like she was presenting evidence in court. "Here's my assignment letter. This garage is classified as emergency backup parking according to neighborhood rules. I'll need it for, about a week." I quickly checked my house purchase contract on my phone. There was absolutely no emergency parking clause anywhere in the documentation. "Can you show me the original neighborhood rules document?" I asked, trying to stay polite but feeling my blood pressure rising. "You'll receive a copy via email within 3 to 5 business days. Right now you need to follow the temporary order." I glanced at my watch, knowing I had a client meeting in 30 minutes. "I need to get to work. Can you move your car?" Her smile got even more aggressive. "Sorry, hon, this is official community business. You can park on the street." I stood there on the street, looking at my own garage, occupied by this stranger's beat-up Honda, and something clicked in my brain. This wasn't just some misunderstanding or emergency situation. This woman was running some kind of scam, and she had picked the wrong tech guy to mess with. She wanted to play authority games? Fine. But I played with technology advantages that she couldn't even imagine. I spent the next hour at my computer instead of going to the office, doing research on Margaret Rowley. What I found was fascinating and completely unsurprising. She wasn't listed anywhere as an official neighborhood rule manager or HOA representative. She was, however, a former legal assistant who had worked for Mitchell & Associates, which happened to be my uncle's law firm. She'd been fired 6 months ago for what the public records described as inappropriate client intimidation tactics. This wasn't random. This was personal, and it was about to get very interesting. I sent Margaret the most polite email I could manage. "Hi, Margaret. Thanks for the info about emergency parking. I'll be out of town on business for 5 days starting tomorrow. Garage will be locked for security. Trust the community rules will handle everything appropriately. Ethan." I watched from my living room window as Margaret read the email on her phone. She looked up at my house, smiled that cold, calculated smile, and then opened her car trunk. She pulled out camping gear and a toolkit. This woman had come prepared for war, and she clearly thought she was dealing with some naive tech boy who would roll over and accept her authority. What she didn't realize was that she had just challenged someone who spent his days designing systems to solve complex problems, and Margaret Rowley was about to become my most interesting problem to solve. The game was on. I woke up at 5:30 a.m. on Wednesday morning with the kind of excitement usually reserved for Christmas or vacation days. Today was both actually, since I was about to embark on the most satisfying vacation of my life. I loaded my Tesla with ski equipment, purely for show since I wasn't actually planning to ski, and did a final check of my garage security system. The cameras showed Margaret had spent the night sleeping in her Honda inside my garage, complete with a sleeping bag and what looked like a cooler full of supplies. Perfect. She had already self-imprisoned herself. Now I just needed to make it official and disappear to the mountains. At exactly 6 a.m., I activated maximum security mode on my garage system through my phone app. The garage door sealed completely with a satisfying mechanical sound and electronic locks engaged with a loud click that I could hear from inside my car. Through the security camera feed, I watched Margaret jolted awake and pounded the windows and door, screaming things I didn't need to hear to understand. I drove out of the neighborhood with my rear view mirror showing Margaret hammering on my garage door with what looked like a tire iron, yelling, "Hey, hey," at the top of her lungs. By 8:45 a.m., I was cruising up Interstate 70 toward the mountains, and my phone was exploding with missed calls from Margaret. I let them all go to voicemail and listened to the increasingly frantic messages during a gas stop. "Ethan, you locked me in here. Open this right now. This is kidnapping." Her voice was already cracking with panic, and I hadn't even reached the resort yet. I started recording a video for my own entertainment. This is why smart garages matter, not just for safety, but for stopping fake authorities. The contrast between Margaret's panic and my growing excitement was already making this the best road trip ever. The resort was exactly as advertised. I checked into a Lakeview suite, ordered mimosas, and monitored the garage feed. The visual contrast was absolutely perfect. While I was settling into luxury accommodations with panoramic mountain views, Margaret was discovering that my garage door couldn't be opened from the inside when the security system was engaged. At 12:15 p.m., I watched through my phone camera as a police car pulled up to my house. Officer Reynolds, according to his name tag visible on the high-definitive feed, approached my garage door, where Margaret was explaining her situation with wild hand gestures. "You locked me inside here? This is illegal imprisonment." I could read her lips through the camera. Officer Reynolds checked some paperwork, probably my property ownership documents, and then spoke to Margaret with the patience of someone who had dealt with neighborhood drama before. "Ma'am, this is his private garage. You're the one trespassing." Margaret's response was immediate and loud enough that I could actually hear it through the camera's audio. "I have community authority." Officer Reynolds asked for documentation, and I watched Margaret fumble through her folder of fake papers like a poker player with a terrible hand. It's being processed." The officer's body language clearly showed he wasn't buying any of this. He suggested she call someone to pick her up, since she couldn't stay in someone else's garage without permission. That's when Margaret played what she thought was her trump card. "My car won't start. I have to be here." What Officer Reynolds couldn't see, but my security cameras captured perfectly, was that Margaret had disconnected her car battery the night before to create this exact emergency excuse. She had planned this whole operation, right down to the fake breakdown story. I was dealing with a professional scammer, not some confused neighbor. By 1:30 p.m., I was sitting beside the resort's infinity pool with an iPad streaming my garage camera feed, ordering gourmet lunch from the poolside menu. This was literally the definition of relaxing vacation entertainment. Margaret had spent the morning trying to open the garage door from inside using the emergency release mechanism, but my smart system detected her tampering attempts and activated countermeasures. Strobe lights flashed, and a loud alarm sounded whenever she touched the emergency controls. I watched her stumble around, covering her ears and temporarily blinded by the lights. "Smart technology," I said to my phone camera, making karma automatic since 2024. The other resort guests probably thought I was watching some kind of action movie on my tablet. If only they knew they were witnessing live-stream justice in progress. Around 4 p.m., I noticed Margaret getting more organized in her approach to the situation. She pulled camping equipment from her car trunk and began setting up what appeared to be a semi-permanent living situation inside my garage. She set up camp, tent, toilet, sleeping bag, and somehow found power. This woman had definitely come prepared for an extended siege. She wasn't just some opportunistic scammer, she was running a calculated operation with backup plans and survival gear. From my hot tub overlooking the mountains, I had to admire her dedication to being completely wrong about everything. The level of preparation she had put into stealing my garage was almost impressive in its audacity. Mrs. Garcia, 72, knocked on my garage door looking concerned. I watched her conversation with Margaret through the door, wishing I could hear the audio clearly. Mrs. Garcia had lived in this neighborhood for 20 years and had the kind of common sense that comes with experience. Based on her body language, she was trying to talk sense into Margaret, probably explaining that camping in someone else's garage wasn't exactly legal or reasonable. Margaret's responses looked increasingly agitated, and I could see her pointing at my house and making sweeping gestures that probably included claims about her fake authority and my supposed crimes against community standards. As the sun set over the mountains and I enjoyed a craft beer on my resort balcony, I reflected on the day's events. Margaret had escalated from simple trespassing to full-scale illegal camping, all while I was being pampered at a luxury spa 2 hours away. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as she realized that I wasn't coming back anytime soon, and that her situation was only going to get more uncomfortable. I pulled out a manila folder from my briefcase, research I had printed about Margaret's background, her firing from my uncle's law firm, and her history of targeting neighbors with fake violations. This wasn't just about my garage anymore. This was about stopping a predator who had been scamming people throughout the neighborhood. But first, I had a massage appointment and a gourmet dinner to enjoy. Justice could wait until after the mountain trout special. Day one of my mountain vacation began with Margaret discovering the creative possibilities of social media desperation. At 6 a.m., while I was enjoying room service breakfast with a view of snow-capped peaks, Margaret began live streaming from inside my garage. I watched her on my phone while buttering my croissant, fascinated by her ability to present herself as the victim in a situation where she was clearly the criminal. "I'm being held hostage by Ethan Mitchell. He locked me in his garage. I have community authority rights," she announced to her massive audience of exactly 2 viewers. The comments section was a masterclass in family disappointment and anonymous trolling. Her mother wrote, "Honey, please come home," while a fake support account provided messages like, "Stay strong, sister." I had to give Margaret credit. Even her manufactured support system was more elaborate than most people's real social networks. By 7:30 a.m., I was recording my own video content from the resort restaurant, providing commentary like a nature documentary narrator. Margaret has discovered social media live streaming. She's really going viral in the worst possible way. The contrast between my mountain breakfast and her garage imprisonment was visually perfect. While I was enjoying Eggs Benedict, Margaret was rationing granola bars and dealing with increasingly urgent bathroom logistics. At 9:15 a.m., Officer Reynolds made his second appearance at my property, looking significantly less patient than the day before. Margaret had called 911 again, this time claiming she had been trapped for 20 hours and demanding immediate rescue. "Officer, I've been trapped here 20 hours. This is illegal imprisonment." I could see her through the camera, hair disheveled from sleeping in a car, clothes wrinkled but still maintaining her authority figure facade. Officer Reynolds' patience was clearly wearing thin as he explained once again that Margaret was trespassing in my garage, not being unlawfully imprisoned. "Ma'am, we discussed this yesterday. You're trespassing in his garage," he said, with the tone of someone repeating himself to a particularly slow child. Margaret's response escalated to conspiracy theories. "But I have community emergency powers." When asked for documentation, she claimed verbal authorization from the board, which led to Officer Reynolds asking the obvious follow-up question, "What board? Who authorized you?" Margaret's answer was a masterpiece of circular logic. "The Community Management Board!" Of course there was no such board in our neighborhood, and Officer Reynolds was clearly beginning to understand that he was dealing with someone who existed in an alternate reality, where she held imaginary authority over other people's property. The technological warfare escalated around 10 a.m. when Margaret tried to charge her phone using her car's outlet. I activated my garage's signal blocking feature remotely, watching through the camera as her phone lost all connectivity. "Why is my phone not working?" she screamed at the garage door like it was personally responsible for the laws of physics. From my mountain hiking trail, I provided commentary to my phone camera. Wi-Fi blocker feature. Best $200 upgrade I ever bought. Margaret spent the next hour holding her phone in different positions, trying to find a signal that my system was specifically designed to prevent. Watching her technical troubleshooting attempts was like watching someone try to fix a television by hitting it with increasingly larger objects. Day 2 brought escalation in both luxury and desperation. While I enjoyed a professional spa massage with mountain views, Margaret was entering her second day of eating stale granola bars from her glove compartment. The bathroom situation had clearly become problematic, based on her increasingly frequent exits from the car to pound on the garage door with genuine desperation rather than just anger. At 11 a.m., I witnessed what I later came to think of as the locksmith disaster. Through my camera feed, I watched a locksmith van pull up to my house, summoned by Margaret, who had apparently found a way to contact them using some kind of emergency communication method. I immediately called 911 from my resort lounge chair. "Hi, someone's trying to break into my garage while I'm out of town." It was technically true and legally justified. Officer Reynolds arrived at the same time the locksmith was setting up his equipment, creating one of those perfect timing moments that you couldn't script if you tried. "Stop immediately. This is private property," Officer Reynolds told the locksmith, who was clearly confused about being caught in the middle of someone else's drama. "But the woman inside hired us," the locksmith explained, probably wondering how his day had suddenly become so complicated. "The woman inside is trespassing," Officer Reynolds replied with the weary tone of someone explaining the same basic legal concepts for the third time in 2 days. I watched Margaret emerge from the garage when the locksmith packed up his tools, standing in front of a growing crowd of neighbors who had come to witness what was clearly becoming the neighborhood's most entertaining crisis. Margaret's public humiliation was reaching peak levels as neighbors gathered to watch her explain her situation to anyone who would listen. Her hair was matted from sleeping in a car, her clothes were wrinkled beyond repair, and she had the wild-eyed look of someone who was beginning to realize that her plan had some serious flaws. "Y'all don't understand. I have legal rights," she shouted at the growing audience, which now included several people taking photos and videos with their phones. Mrs. Garcia, bless her heart, tried to be the voice of reason. "Dear, the only right you have is to call someone to pick you up." But Margaret was beyond reason at this point, fully committed to her role as the wronged authority figure being persecuted by a criminal tech bro. The afternoon brought Margaret's most desperate escalation yet. She set up a lawn chair in front of my garage and created a poster board sign that read, "Garage thief, lock me out," of emergency shelter, in marker that was already starting to run from the mountain humidity. I decided this was the perfect time to test my garage's automatic sprinkler system, which I had labeled as maintenance mode for legal purposes. Margaret got completely soaked, her poster sign dissolved into illegible mush, and I provided commentary from my mountain resort hot tub. Smart irrigation, keeping Karen drama properly hydrated. By evening, Margaret was sitting in a collapsed, soaking wet tent screaming at my security camera, "Ethan Michelli! I know you're watching! This isn't over!" She looked directly at the camera and mouthed words I was grateful I couldn't hear clearly. From my resort bar, finishing my craft beer, I nearly choked on my drink. Margaret's tent had collapsed in the sprinkler water, and she looked directly at the camera, mouthing, "I know you're watching." Tomorrow was going to be very interesting. Day 3 dawned with Margaret achieving what I could only describe as full refugee camp status. At 5 a.m., while I was still enjoying hotel room service and mountain sunrise views, Margaret had transformed my driveway into what looked like a disaster relief operation. She had erected a waterproof tent, installed a portable toilet system, somehow managed to run an extension cord to a neighbor's outdoor outlet, and created a large banner that read, "Ghostage situation, call news media," in letters large enough to be seen from space. For my resort restaurant, I had to admire her commitment to being completely wrong about everything. "She's escalated to full homeless camp status," I commented to my phone camera. "Impressive dedication to a losing strategy." At 8:30, Margaret called local news with the worst media pitch ever. I listened through my security camera's audio feed as she called local TV stations. "I have a breaking story about a tech guy illegally imprisoning a community official," she announced to what was clearly a very uninterested news desk intern. The response was predictable. "Ma'am, do you have documentation proving your official position?" Margaret's answer was creative fiction. "It's pending verification from headquarters." The dial tone that followed was audible even through my camera system. Watching someone get rejected by local news while you're sipping mimosas beside an infinity pool adds a special flavor to the whole experience. The power tool incident at 10:15 a.m. marked Margaret's transition from desperate to genuinely dangerous. She borrowed an angle grinder and tried to cut through my garage lock. This was the moment I realized that Margaret had moved beyond simple trespassing into actual property destruction. I immediately called the fire department from my resort lounge chair. Someone's using dangerous power tools near my garage. Possible gas line hazard. The fire truck arrived with the kind of urgency that suggested they took gas line safety very seriously, followed immediately by police backup and an ambulance. The visual spectacle that followed was better than any reality television show ever produced. While I was enjoying a scenic mountain chairlift ride, Margaret was surrounded by a fire truck, 2 police cars, an ambulance, and approximately 8 uniformed officials trying to understand why a grown woman was living in someone else's driveway and attempting to cut through property with power tools. "Ma'am, you cannot use power tools on someone else's property," the fire chief explained with professional patience. Margaret's response was immediate and loud. "This is emergency access." When asked about permits, she provided her standard response. "I don't need permits, I'm community management." Officer Reynolds delivered what sounded like a final warning. "Ms. Rowley, this is your final warning. Leave this property immediately or face arrest for trespassing, destruction of property, and public disturbance." Day 4 brought Margaret's complete psychological breakdown, which I observed while enjoying the resort's spa services. Margaret had clearly realized that she had become the neighborhood's primary entertainment source. Children were riding their bikes past my house specifically to stare at the spectacle, and someone had set up lawn chairs across the street like they were watching an outdoor movie. One neighbor even sold popcorn. It felt like a full Karen circus. At 2 p.m., Margaret posted a 50-minute live stream meltdown, unhinged and oddly tragic. "Ethan Mitchell has destroyed my life. He's using tech privilege to oppress community officials. This is digital class warfare," she sobbed to her live audience, which had grown to an impressive 47 viewers, most of whom were clearly there for entertainment value rather than support. The comments section of her live stream was a fascinating study in human nature. Her mother continued to plead with her to come home, while anonymous viewers provided a mixture of genuine concern and brutal honesty. "Lady, you're in his garage," wrote one commenter. "Call a taxi," suggested another. "This is hilarious," was unfortunately the most popular sentiment. Margaret's response to the criticism was to double down on her conspiracy theories about tech privilege and digital warfare, which only made the comments section more brutal. I found myself feeling almost sorry for her, except for the part where she was a criminal who had been systematically scamming my neighbors for months before targeting me. Margaret's attempt to sleep in her increasingly soggy tent provided the perfect opportunity to test my garage's ventilation system. I triggered the garage fan. The tent collapsed. Her sleeping bag flew into the driveway. Margaret, on her live stream, with her hair wild from the artificial windstorm, announced to her audience, "He's using weather control weapons." The chat comments exploded with laughing emojis and observations like, "Weather weapons? It's called a fan, Karen. And ma'am, this is a Wendy's." I was providing my own commentary from the resort bar. Industrial ventilation, making comfortable sleeping impossible for trespassers since 2024. The neighborhood intervention came at 8 p.m. when Mrs. Garcia organized an emergency community meeting. Through my security cameras, I watched 15 neighbors gather to discuss what they diplomatically called the situation with Margaret's camping. The vote was unanimous. Margaret must leave immediately or face formal community complaints to the city about illegal camping violations. When confronted with this news, Margaret's response was predictable. "You can't evict me. I am the community management." One neighbor produced an actual HOA contact directory, which clearly showed that Margaret was not listed in any official capacity anywhere. "No, Margaret," they explained with patience. "You're not listed anywhere in any official capacity." The breaking point came at 11 p.m. when Margaret, sitting in her collapsed, wet tent, finally called her mother. "Mom, can you please come get me? I think I made a huge mistake." Margaret's mother arrived at midnight with a pickup truck, but instead of packing up and leaving, Margaret pulled out a manila folder labeled "Legal Options" and spread papers across the truck's hood. She wasn't ready to surrender yet, but her reinforcements had arrived. The war was entering its final phase, and tomorrow would bring the ultimate confrontation between a determined tech engineer and a desperate criminal who refused to accept defeat. I checked out of the Rocky Mountain Resort and Spa at 8 a.m. on Sunday morning with the kind of satisfaction that comes from a perfect vacation. The 2-hour drive home through the Colorado mountains gave me time to reflect on the most successful revenge operation of my adult life. My phone camera showed Margaret still at her improvised campsite, but now with additional supplies from her mother's pickup truck. It appeared that family support had arrived, but not in the way that would actually solve Margaret's fundamental problem of being a criminal trespasser who refused to accept reality. 5 days ago, I left for a relaxing mountain vacation, I said to my phone camera while driving through scenic mountain passes. I'm returning to what looks like a protest camp in my driveway. Modern problems require modern solutions. At 10:30 a.m., I pulled into my driveway to find Margaret emerging from her tent like a disaster survivor from a post-apocalyptic movie. Her hair was matted beyond repair. She was wearing the same clothes from 5 days ago, and her mascara had created dark streaks down her face that made her look like a rejected extra from a zombie film. She was clutching a legal folder like it contained the secrets of the universe, when it probably contained more of her fake documentation and fraudulent authority claims. "Ethan, you're back," she said with the tone of someone who had been expecting this moment but wasn't sure how it would go. I calmly unloaded my ski equipment from my Tesla, taking my time to emphasize the contrast between my successful vacation and her disastrous camping experience. "Excellent observation skills," I replied. "How was the outdoor camping experience? I hope you enjoyed Colorado's famous mountain weather." Margaret's response was immediate and desperate. "You destroyed my life." I paused in my unpacking to give her my full attention, because this was the moment I had been building toward for 5 days. "No, Margaret," I said with the kind of calm that comes from having all the advantages in a situation. "I locked my garage. You destroyed your own life by refusing to leave my property when you were caught trespassing." I could see the realization dawning in her eyes that her victim narrative wasn't going to work on someone who had documented evidence of her criminal behavior. She was holding that legal folder like it was a life preserver, but we both knew she was drowning in the consequences of her own choices. I set up my laptop on my porch table, creating an impromptu evidence presentation that would have made my uncle's law firm proud. The camera footage compilation was devastating. Margaret entering my garage without permission, disconnecting her car battery to fake an emergency, making multiple false police reports, attempting property damage with power tools, harassing neighbors, and violating city camping ordinances. "Legal assistant background, right?" I said while scrolling through 5 days of documented criminal activity. "You should recognize evidence compilation when you see it." Margaret's face went pale as she realized that her opponent had been collecting evidence while she had been collecting sympathy from strangers on the internet. The truth revelation came slowly, like air leaking from a punctured tire. Margaret sat down heavily in her camping chair, the legal folder shaking in her hands. Okay, she said in a voice that had lost all its authority and aggression. "I wasn't official community management. I was trying to establish authority." I continued my evidence presentation, showing her own documented attempts to scam other neighbors with fake violations and fraudulent fees. "By stealing my garage?" I asked, genuinely curious about the logic behind her strategy. Margaret's answer revealed the personal nature of her attack. "I lost my job 6 months ago, legal assistant position at Mitchell & Associates." The family connection hit me like a cold mountain wind. "Mitchell & Associates? That's my uncle's law firm." Margaret nodded with the expression of someone who had been caught in a lie that was much bigger than anyone realized. "Your uncle David Mitchell fired me for inappropriate client intimidation tactics." The revenge plot was finally revealed in all its petty, personal glory. Margaret had recognized my last name from the beginning and had deliberately targeted me for family revenge. "So this was personal vendetta from the beginning?" I asked, feeling pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. "I wanted to prove I still had power," Margaret admitted, "that I could control someone from your family, make you feel helpless like you made me feel." The logic was breathtaking in its stupidity. "By living in my garage for a week?" I asked, genuinely amazed at the complexity of her plan and the simplicity of her execution. "It seemed logical when I planned it," she said, which explained everything and nothing about how someone could think that camping in a stranger's garage was an effective revenge strategy. I presented Margaret with a choice that would determine the rest of her immediate future. "Margaret, I could press serious charges right now. Trespassing, false police reports, property damage, stalking, harassment, fraud." I let that sink in while she calculated the potential legal consequences. "Please, I have nowhere else to go," she said, which was probably true but not really my problem. "Or," I continued, "I open the garage right now, you drive away forever, and we never speak again." Margaret looked up with hope for the first time in days. "What's the catch?" she asked, because even in defeat, she was still thinking like a scammer. "Public apology on your live stream platform," I said. "Admit everything was fake. Clear my name completely." The final live-stream confession was watched by over 1,200 viewers who had been following Margaret's descent into criminal camping. "This is Margaret Rowley," she said to her phone camera with the tone of someone confessing to war crimes. "I need to publicly apologize to Ethan Mitchell and this entire neighborhood. I was never a community official. I trespassed in his garage. Everything I claimed was completely false. Ethan was defending his property rights. I was 100% wrong about everything." The live comments exploded, with justice-seeking viewers posting things like, "Finally," and "Justice served," and "Karen gets owned." Margaret had become an internet cautionary tale in real time. I opened my garage using the phone app, and Margaret's Honda Pilot rolled out with the pathetic wheeze of a car that had been sitting with a dead battery for 5 days. Mrs. Garcia provided jumper cables with the kind of neighborly assistance that Margaret had never deserved but received anyway. As Margaret loaded her camping equipment into her car, she asked the question that had probably been bothering her for days. "Ethan, why didn't you just call police on day one?" I considered my answer carefully, because it was important that she understand the lesson. "Because watching you self-destruct was more entertaining than any streaming service," I said. "Plus, I needed a vacation anyway." As Margaret's car disappeared down the street, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A manila folder, labeled Phase 2, Neighbor Target, List, was stuck under my workbench where she had been camping. Margaret's operation had been much bigger than just my garage. The manila folder that Margaret left behind was like finding buried treasure, except instead of gold coins, it contained evidence of a neighborhood-wide fraud operation that made my garage situation look like a minor inconvenience. I spread the papers across my kitchen table and discovered detailed scam plans targeting 8 different neighbors with fake violations and bogus financial penalties. Mrs. Garcia was marked for a $300 fine for non-regulation mailbox color. Tom Williams faced a $500 penalty for lawn height violations. Sarah Chen was targeted for a $400 charge for children's playground noise pollution. Mike Torres was being set up for a $250 fee for unauthorized vehicle parking patterns. The total planned theft was over $4,200 from families who were just trying to live their lives in peace. Within 2 hours of Margaret's departure, I had organized an emergency neighborhood meeting in my backyard. 15 neighbors gathered to examine evidence that revealed the scope of Margaret's criminal enterprise. The reactions ranged from anger to relief to genuine shock. "She already tried finding me," Mrs. Garcia exclaimed. "I thought it was legitimate." Tom Williams was shaking his head. "She demanded $500 from us last month." Sarah Chen was holding her children's photos that Margaret had apparently taken without permission. "She told me our kids' playground was disturbing neighborhood harmony, wanted $400 immediately." The most disturbing revelation came from Mike Torres. "I actually paid her $200. She said it was mandatory parking compliance fee." The realization that Margaret had already successfully collected money from neighbors transformed our situation from a neighborhood dispute into a criminal investigation. I contacted Officer Reynolds and presented him with Margaret's documentation. "This is an organized theft scheme," he said after reviewing the evidence. "We'll file formal charges for fraud, theft, and organized criminal activity." The real HOA president, Mr. Patterson, confirmed from Arizona, "Margaret Rowley was never associated with our organization." I felt vindicated knowing that my mountain vacation had not only solved my garage problem, but had also exposed a neighborhood predator who had been operating under everyone's radar. The police investigation moved quickly once they had Margaret's own documentation of her criminal activities. Within a week, Margaret was arrested at her Denver apartment and charged with multiple counts of fraud, theft, trespassing, filing false police reports, and organized criminal activity. The local news picked up the story with the headline, "Fake HOA Official Scams Neighborhood for Thousands." And suddenly, our quiet community was getting attention for all the wrong reasons. Officer Reynolds became something of a neighborhood hero for his patience in dealing with Margaret's increasingly desperate attempts to legitimize her criminal behavior. The community response was overwhelmingly positive, with neighbors organizing a block party to celebrate the end of Margaret's fraudulent authority. Mrs. Garcia took charge of the planning, declaring that we needed to celebrate justice and good neighbors. The party was held in my garage, which had been transformed from a crime scene into a symbol of community resistance. I installed a new garage sign that read, "Smart Garage Trespassers will be live-streamed," which got more laughs than it probably deserved. 3 neighbors requested information about similar security systems, and I realized that Margaret's criminal behavior had inadvertently created a business opportunity. The legal proceedings concluded with Margaret pleading guilty to multiple felony charges and being sentenced to community service, restitution payments, and probation. She was required to pay back the money she had stolen, plus penalties and legal fees, which totaled over $15,000. The judge noted that Margaret's use of fake authority to intimidate and defraud neighbors represented a particularly harmful type of community predator behavior. Margaret's final court statement was recorded and shared throughout the neighborhood. I sincerely apologize to Pine Valley Heights neighborhood for my criminal behavior. My actions were wrong and harmful. Ethan Mitchell and the other neighbors were defending themselves against a criminal fraud scheme. I deserve these consequences. 6 months later, I received a letter from the correctional facility where Margaret was completing her community service. Ethan, she wrote, I'm serving my time and taking legitimate paralegal courses through the state program. I want you to know that your response to my criminal behavior probably saved me from committing worse crimes against other communities. Thank you for documenting everything and holding me accountable. P.S. Your garage security setup has become legendary among the other people in my program. Apparently my story is being used as an example of how not to commit property crimes. The letter was signed simply Margaret, without any of the fake titles or authority claims that had characterized our previous interactions. The neighborhood had returned to peaceful normalcy, with the added benefit that everyone was now aware of how to spot and respond to fake authority scams. Mrs. Garcia had become our unofficial community security coordinator, maintaining a list of legitimate HOA contacts and procedures for reporting suspicious authority claims. My garage security business had grown beyond our neighborhood, with requests coming from communities throughout Colorado who had heard about the Margaret situation. I had inadvertently become a minor expert in anti-fraud home security systems, which was not a career path I had ever imagined, but was surprisingly fulfilling. The irony that Margaret's criminal behavior had led to my most successful business venture was not lost on me, and I made sure to mention it in every client consultation as an example of how crime definitely doesn't pay, but preventing crime can be quite profitable. The garage that had started as Margaret's target had become the foundation of a thriving business, dedicated to protecting other people from exactly the kind of predator she had been. 6 months after Margaret's arrest and conviction, life in Pine Valley Heights had settled into a peaceful routine that felt almost boring compared to the drama of the garage incident. I had grown to appreciate boring, especially when it meant that my neighbors weren't being systematically defrauded by fake authority figures. My security consulting business had expanded beyond anything I had imagined, with over 300 customers throughout Colorado requesting Margaret-proof home security systems. The irony that a criminal's attempt to victimize me had led to my most successful business venture was something I reflected on daily while installing smart garage systems for clients who had heard about my story through word of mouth and social media. The new neighbors who moved into Margaret's former rental house presented an interesting test of the neighborhood's newfound awareness about fake authority claims. Brad and Jennifer Miller seemed nice enough at first, but there were subtle warning signs that reminded me uncomfortably of Margaret's initial approach. Brad constantly carried a clipboard and had a tendency to measure things in other people's yards. Jennifer sported an aggressive manager haircut and spoke about community optimization in ways that made my neighbors nervous. When Brad approached me with his clipboard and announced that he was conducting voluntary property assessments, I felt a familiar chill of recognition. My response was immediate and firm. Hard pass. Good luck with that. I observed them through my expanded security camera network, documenting their activities with the same systematic approach that had exposed Margaret's crimes. Brad was measuring neighbors' lawns with a ruler and taking detailed notes. Jennifer was photographing mailboxes and garden decorations, while consulting what appeared to be a manual. Both were approaching neighbors with official-looking papers and making vague references to community standards. The pattern was disturbingly familiar, but my neighbors were no longer naive about fake authority claims. I created a neighborhood group chat called Pine Valley Reality Check and shared security footage of Brad and Jennifer's activities, along with Margaret's fraud documentation as a reference point. Within 48 hours, 23 neighbors had joined the group and were sharing their own encounters with the Miller couple. The educated response was immediate and effective. When Brad approached Tom Williams with claims about fence height violations, Tom was ready. Show me documentation from the elected HOA board. Brad's response was identical to Margaret's. It's standard community regulation. Tom's follow-up was equally prepared. I'll need official paperwork, signed by verified board members. Brad's retreat was swift and permanent. Within 1 week, Brad and Jennifer realized that our neighborhood was immune to fake authority tactics and abandoned their apparent scam operation. Jennifer approached Mrs. Garcia with what appeared to be a genuine apology. "We're sorry. We thought we could help by organizing community standards." Mrs. Garcia's response was perfect. Helping means asking how to help, not assuming you know better than people who've lived here for decades. The Miller couple transformed overnight into normal, helpful neighbors who asked permission before offering suggestions. The Margaret experience had created a neighborhood immune system that could identify and neutralize fake authority threats before they became serious problems. I received an unexpected letter from the correctional facility where Margaret was completing her community service. "Ethan," she wrote, "6 months later, I'm serving my final weeks of community service and completing legitimate paralegal courses through the state rehabilitation program. I want you to know that your response to my criminal behavior probably saved me from committing worse crimes against other communities. The counselors here say that most people who start with small-scale fraud, like mine, escalate to larger crimes if they're not stopped early. Thank you for documenting everything and holding me accountable. P.S. Your garage security setup has become legendary among the people in my program. Apparently, my story is being used as an example of how not to commit property crimes." The letter was signed simply Margaret, without any of the fake titles that had characterized our previous interactions. My garage revenge story had taken on a life of its own on social media, generating over 89,000 upvotes and 5,700 comments from people sharing their own experiences with fake authority figures and neighborhood scammers. The top comment that appeared repeatedly was, "This is peak smart home revenge. Technology plus vacation equals perfect karma." I had become an accidental internet celebrity in the very specific niche of technology-based justice story. My security consulting business, Mitchell Smart Security Solutions, was thriving, with a 300 customer waiting list and features in home security magazines. The second annual anti-fraud block party was held in my garage, which had been converted into a community celebration space with fold-out tables and string lights. I raised my beer to toast the gathered neighbors, to Margaret Rowley, who taught us that sometimes the best defense is stepping back, letting criminals expose themselves, and documenting everything while you're enjoying your life. The crowd responded with enthusiastic cheers. Mrs. Garcia added her own toast, and to Ethan, who proved that revenge is a dish best served poolside with premium Wi-Fi. The laughter that followed was the sound of a community that had learned to protect itself while maintaining its sense of humor. I checked my security app one final time, showing the garage empty except for my Tesla and the party decorations that transformed a former crime scene into a celebration space. 1 year ago, this garage was a battleground, I told the gathered neighbors. Tonight, it's celebrating community and common sense. Lessons learned. Don't mess with people's property. Don't fake authority you don't have. And always, always invest in smart home technology with reliable Wi-Fi. The freeze-frame moment of neighbors laughing together in the space where Margaret had tried to establish her fraudulent authority felt like the perfect ending to a story that had started with criminal trespassing and ended with community justice. The security system remained armed and ready, but hopefully it would never be needed for anything more dramatic than deterring package thieves and recording family barbecues.